But let me introduce to you now Bob Zellner.
Good evening. I'm glad to be here in New York tonight. My daughter was here earlier. She's a New York psychoanalyst. And you just about have to be one to be an analyst in New York. But I also have a daughter named Katie, so be easy on us. I'm Bob Zellner. I'm actually from L.A., Lower Alabama. I grew up in South Alabama. My father was a Methodist minister. He was also a member of the Ku Klux Klan. My grandfather was a member of the Klan, and most of my aunts and uncles. The aunts were, of course, in the auxiliary Klan. I was named after Bob Jones, who has a Bob Jones University. He also conducted the wedding ceremony for my mother and father. So I come from a very fundamentalist, even terroristic background. And so to be known as a New Yorker is unusual. And it's also unusual that someone with my background would have wound up in the civil rights movement. But I went to Huntington College in Montgomery, Alabama in 1957. And if you'll remember what's happening in the South at that time, I wound up as my senior year meeting Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, and they got me started on a life of crime. As a result of their influence, when I graduated college in 1961, I joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Snick. Some of you older people might remember that. Snick was one of the civil rights organizations. We were young and brash, and we didn't believe that we couldn't go anywhere in the United States, and so we usually went to the roughest places there were. I was with Snick from 1961 to 1967, and I was the first white Southerner, field secretary for Snick, and also one of the last whites in the organization when it became all black in about 1967. As a result of being in SNCC, I was arrested 25 times in 5 different states, shot at, beaten, and generally mistreated. I don't know why they did that to us in the South, but we did have a lot of supporters, and we had a lot of supporters here in New York, so I thank you belatedly for that. One of the events that I remember particularly about that time, and Muriel Tillinghast and her daughter are with us tonight, also they're SNCC veterans, and also my daughter's friend Scott are here also. But one of the things that I remember particularly was the summer of 1964. It was a particularly mythic period in the United States because in that summer, we organized students from all around the country to come to Mississippi because people were getting killed because they were black and wanted to register to vote. Many of our organizers were shot. Some of them were killed. And we thought that if we brought students from around the country to Mississippi, then we would be able to break that wall of segregation and be able to get support from the United States. We thought that the federal government would come to our aid. And one of the myths was that the federal government was actually in favor of civil rights at that time. One of the movies that was made of the 1964 period, which I had something to do with, was Mississippi Burning. They participated in the mythic misrepresentation of American history when they made the FBI the heroes of the civil rights movement. In Greenwood, Mississippi, that summer, after the murder of 3 civil rights workers, Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner, 2 of whom were white New Yorkers, this country rose up to a person practically and said, we have to end segregation once and for all. And the federal government was not yet willing to go along with that. When we organized those students in 1964 to come to Mississippi, do you know what the reaction of our government was? J. Edgar Hoover went on television and radio the day before 1,000 students were to come to Mississippi for the summer and said, there will be no federal protection for civil rights workers in Mississippi this summer. The reaction of the Klan was to capture the first 3 civil rights workers who came down across the state line. They were murdered and buried 18 feet deep in an earthen dam. The reaction of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and other civil rights organizations was to mobilize massively to go into Mississippi. If they thought that that would keep people out, it helped bring people to Mississippi. Brave people. And one of the groups that came were American stars, American actors. And I have a particular memory of Harry Belafonte, Sidney Poitier, and Marlon Brando coming to Greenwood, Mississippi that summer. Greenwood, Mississippi was a cauldron of violence. Beckwith was from Mississippi. Beckwith had killed Medgar Evers and was a hero in Mississippi because he murdered a black civil rights worker. Greenwood, Mississippi was as lawless as the West ever was, and it was open season on civil rights workers, and yet Harry Belafonte, Sidney Poitier, and the mythic Marlon Brando came to us in Mississippi in the summer of '64. Now, my particular relationship with this was that I was a white Southerner and a member of the staff, so I was to take care of Mr. Brando. Can you imagine? I'm 21 years old. I hardly ever been out of Alabama. And now I've got to go around with this guy who is a legend, of course, in his own mind and ours as well. I picked him up at the airport, and we talked about how to get from the airport to this tremendous rally that had been organized for these 3 people, and also to show that the outside world was coming to Mississippi. And I picked Belafonte up because we had to segregate. We couldn't have black people and white people in the same car because we'd get shot at more often that way. And I remember Jim Foreman, the executive director of Snick, said, "Okay, Bob, you drive Marlon to the rally and pretend you're ordinary white people." So I said, "Well, I can pretend, but I don't know about Marlon." But, he's supposed to be a good actor, so hopefully we'll make out all right. So we're on the way to this rally. 14,000 people waiting at the gymnasium to meet these mythic people. And Brando says, "Before we get there, Zellner, I've got to go to the bathroom." And I said, "At a time like this, you've got to go to the bathroom." He said, "Well, yeah, there's one here." I said, "Well, there's a truck stop up here. We'll stop at that bathroom." He said, "What kind of bathroom do they have?" I said, "Why does it matter?" He said, "Well, it has to be a particular kind of bathroom because," he said, "do they have stalls or is it like all urinals and everything?" And I said, "Well, they have some urinals. Maybe they have some stalls and everything." He says, "I hope they have stalls." So I said to myself, I don't care if it is Marlon Brando. I'm going to find out about this. So I said, "Why is that, Marlon?" I'm driving along. He said, "It's terrible." He says, "I'm standing there like a normal person doing my business and everything. Somebody's right next to me, and all of a sudden they say, 'You're Marlon Brando.'" He was It was certainly a great actor to be able to do that in the front seat of a car on a dark night in Mississippi. But I think he was putting me at ease. But anyway, I remember thinking, boy, I'm here with Marlon Brando. Now we're going to go to this huge rally. We swept into the rally, and all the people there, 14,000 people inside and out, they just went crazy. Here's Harry Belafonte, good friend of our Secretary of State Powell, and Marlon Brando. And so the chairman of our group stands up and he says, "We have a man tonight who's one of the greatest singers in America. We want to have a song from him right to start with." He said, "I give you Bob Zellner." And I said, "Do you mean Belafonte?" And he said, "No." He said, "They've got to hear some freedom songs. You know, we got to get this thing warmed up." So I happened to have been raised in the South, and I knew all the freedom songs, all the church songs and everything. So we sang some songs, and that place rocked, I'm telling you. That place, and here was Belafonte and them back there, and they said, well, they've never seen anything like this. But it meant a tremendous amount in that summer of '64, because just prior to them coming, Silas McGee, who was the project director of the Greenwood Snick office, had been shot in the side of the head with a .38 caliber slug. I caught him as he fell with the slug in the side of his head. Many other people were brutalized because they wanted to go and register to vote. I remember one time 1,000 people were standing at the courthouse in Greenwood, Mississippi. And here's what the white people did. They pulled up in a big pickup truck, and they got out with the monkey. And on the monkey's sign, there was a sign on the monkey that says, "I want to vote too." Now that was both the murderers and the humorists coming to the fore. But you know, we had humor that would beat their humor, because a huge debate broke out in the line of black people. And some people said, "That's an insult. Why would they insult us like that?" And other people said, "No, that's no insult. That 85-year-old white woman has a right to vote like anybody else." Anyway, that was the summer of '64. People were killed, we sang, we laughed. But you know, it was Harry Belafonte who actually summed up the immense experience of that summer by bringing the people from outside, bringing the world press to Mississippi, and it was the beginning of the end of racial segregation at the voting booth in Mississippi and the rest of the South, because by 1965, the next year, the Voting Rights Act passed. And it passed because people like Harry Belafonte and Sidney Poitier and my friend Marlon Brando came south and helped us. Harry summed it up at the end of that great mass meeting when he said, "No matter what they do, it is always true that brotherhood and sisterhood is not so wild a dream as those who profit by postponing it pretend." Thank you.
Bob Zellner.